Welcome to Loren Reads to You. Today, we're reading The Bedtime Killer by Loren Malloy. That's me. We are up to chapter 5. So if you haven't heard chapter 1 through 4 yet, pause this, save this, go back, listen or watch those, and then come back to this. Make sure you're subscribing and following wherever you're watching or seeing this. And if you're ready, get comfortable and let's begin. Chapter 5. It had to have happened because he was feeling so frustrated, and because little Horace hadn't had any fun that day with any of his lovers, only with the memories of it. It caused such rage inside him since he couldn't get his release. Horace realized the more it had been happening, the more the fantasies and the dreams were becoming violent. Something had to change, Horace realized. He needed little Horace to wake up out of it before he loses his mind. Snapping at that client was definitely a sign this was a truth. That night, he laid in the dark, envisioning Chantel again. He closed his tiny blue eyes and saw her terrified ones and smiled. A moan escaped his thin, worm-like lips. At least this still is working for us, he thought before being swept away into his fantasy. After little Horace once again had his sweet release, Horace fell asleep, still covered in his own fluid, thinking not of anything else but of his lover, Chantel. Horace dreamed of Chantel again that night, but it wasn't the same dream as the night before. Chantel standing silhouetted in the window, beautifully naked, her wet hair streaming around her shoulders, her perky breasts were trembling with fear. Horace looked up from them to see her lovely face. She was smiling so lovely at him. He looked at her luscious mouth. It was wide open. He could see Chantel was now screaming. She was screaming so widely and loudly, he was able to see all the way down to the back of her throat. Her eyes were wide and huge, her pupils so very dilated from being terrified, but her eyes never left his. Horace smashed through her window, shattering the glass and climbing through, not caring about the glass shards cutting him. That's when Chantel began to run her sweet, tight ass away from him, causing him to have to chase her. It had become an erotic cat-and-mouse game. His lady knew what he liked. He advanced on her quickly and grabbed her wrist, spinning her naked body into his. Chantel's body was completely against his when their eyes met again. Her scream was ear-shattering and drove Horace into such a desiring lust. He could hardly contain it. Chantel clawed at Horace's face, drawing pain and blood from him with the movement. Horace grabbed her arms and ripped them from their sockets, knowing that they are not needed, and tossed her arms aside. Horace then grabbed Chantel by the ears, pulling her to him and whispered, "Nice and tight now." Horace shuddered at the words, and then stuffed little Horace into Chantel's mouth. It only took a few thrusts before little Horace had made a waterfall of his seed, cascading down from her open mouth. He pulled little Horace out to catch his breath. An image of a blood-covered floor of some dingy caravan flashed before his eyes, only for a moment, while he looked down at his lady before disappearing once again. Instantly, he forced another round of her head, thrusting into her uncontrollably. Horace shuddered with intense lust. He looked down at Chantel's eyes, and they were still huge with massive fear. He smiled and grabbed her by the ears again. Lifting himself out of her mouth, Horace said it once more while holding onto her ears. "Nice and tight." Horace twisted her head, left, then right, many, many times. The feeling, coupled with the sound of her head ripping off her neck, was amazing to him. Horace stood up quickly with one foot pressed down on her chest. Chantel's head came off in his hands. With Chantel's decapitated head in both hands, he shuddered again. His eyes rolled into the back of his head from the pleasure of the sight and sensation of it all. She was staring straight at little Horace with huge wide eyes. He knew she wanted more. After several more times of trying out Chantel's head, Horace looked down and saw Chantel's beautiful body was lying spread eagle on the floor. Her neck vertebrae was still showing through the bloody mess of a neck wound. Horace placed Chantel's dripping head onto the floor next to him, near where her neck-bleeding stump was still watching while he made love to his lady's body. He continued to thrust in and out of her dead, decapitated body while staring at Chantel's head until little Horace erupted inside of her. "It's bedtime, baby!" Horace cried out while keeping his eyes locked on Chantel's lifeless ones. The sensation threw Horace over the edge, causing him to wake up. He was once again covered in his own freshly produced fluid. He had to get up and shower and change the sheet, but one thing was very clear. He had to see Chantel again, and soon. She had to cry out for him again. It was almost 9:15 at night. Horace got into his rusted maroon pickup truck and drove to see his lovely lady Chantel. He couldn't wait one more minute to see her. There was one major problem since he was there last. Floodlights were installed everywhere on the property, and worse than that, his beloved trellis he used to climb every time to visit his lovely lady was removed. Rage filled every cell of his being. What did he think they were going to do? They're rich. They could afford to do that, whereas common man, they would have had to save up for months and months to have these expensive floodlights everywhere like this. Horace sat in his truck, punched his steering wheel repeatedly. What was he going to do? He needed this. All day he had waited with such anticipation, and now he can't see his precious Chantel? She was so hot when she was scared. He remembered after that was a song playing in his head. He couldn't remember anything else. There was just a vision and lyrics of a song. He knew it by heart. It was from Hotel California by the Eagles. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair. He roared. The same lyric over and over. He sang it again in his voice. The same two images were also attached to the lyric like it was on a loop. A blood-soaked old carpet floor and an image of a dingy caravan on the side of a dark highway. He roared again. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair. Horace groaned and stretched. He must have fallen asleep. He looked at the truck's digital clock and realized he had to have been asleep for many hours. He sat up and looked around. He noticed two things instantly. His truck was still running, and he wasn't where he was the last time he looked out the window. He was at Janet Haberdasher's house. He remembered now that he had said he was going to visit her at night, but he didn't remember driving there at all. He also didn't like the dream he had to have been having. Those images gave him such mixed feelings he couldn't even describe it. It was like the most incredible fear mixed with the most erotic lust, all blended together like a cocktail of emotions. A song was somewhere in the background, but he couldn't remember what it was. Looking down, he could see and now feel the wet mess he somehow left in his pants from little Horace. He couldn't remember how he got to his Janet's house. He couldn't remember how he got the mess in his pants. That part scared Horace the most. He couldn't remember creating the mess in his pants. Not being able to remember little Horace's finish and release terrified him. He didn't like that feeling and needed to change it immediately. Horace looked up at Janet's house and thought, daytime. He got out of the truck very gently since it was quiet. Don't want any neighbors to hear a truck door slam and take a peek at him visiting his lover. It could get his dear lady in trouble with her husband. Horace made his way in the night to her bedroom. He knew it and the backyard like the back of his hand, so he needed no light to see where he was going. It was a new moon, and the darkness was extremely helpful, hiding him from public view. Horace looked up at the house and realized it was completely dark. There weren't any lights on at all. No noises were coming from the house either. No! Horace was frantic. She wasn't home. First, he couldn't see his lover Chantal. Now, Janet, it was too much. He began punching himself in the head over and over and over again. That was Chapter 5 of The Bedtime Killer by Loren Malloy. That's me. So make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you're watching or seeing this. If you'd like to get the book for yourself, check it out on Amazon. It's available in paperback and Kindle. And let's get to the next chapter. So, I'll see you then.